Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Two Matts and a Jeff podcast. We're just a couple of middle-aged guys talking sports, and we've been talking a lot of Phillies and baseball lately. And today's episode is all about a comparison between the two World Series teams, the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies and the 2008 Phillies. So we're going to compare them, break them down, and maybe even see which one we think is the better team. So, Jeff, why don't you get us started?
All right. Well, I think why not start with first base since we're starting with number one here. So your first basemen were Pete Rose from the 80 team and, of course, Ryan Howard from the 08 team. I look at there's a big difference as far as a player. You got power and you got speed, agility, quickness, hustle, all that. So you got two completely different types of players. And one should be in the Hall of Fame, but is not. And the other one, I don't know, iffy. Probably don't think he will get in. But very good, both very good players. You have a homegrown player in Ryan Howard. You have Pete Rose, who came over from the Reds after being there for many, many years. Pete Rose brought him over the edge. So you got the downside of Ryan Howard, I think, of course, is all of his strikeouts, okay, and things such as that. And you look at, some of the positives. I have, Pete Rose being a great leader. He's the hit king, so he gets on base. He had really great glove, and he was very tough, of course. So my edge, and it was an edge. I went with Pete Rose.
See, it's tricky because you're comparing two completely different players. So there's one thing to go position by position and another thing to take it the whole. Because you look at Ryan Howard, a lot of home runs. I think I wrote down he had 48 home runs, I think, that season. So, I don't know how many home runs Pete Rose had that season, but I know it was nowhere near that. But he's Johnny Hustle. That's what I know our dad always called him, Johnny Hustle, and he was that guy. And he was the guy that put the 80 team over the edge, because before that they just couldn't get there. He was the guy that pushed him over the edge. I do think in the long run, if you're looking at who's just a better player, Pete Rose is a better player. But Ryan Howard, way more home runs. I love the fact that he was a homegrown guy, something you don't see very often in the Philadelphia Phillies. So if we're going position by position, I probably would go along with you there to say Pete Rose, edges out Ryan Howard at first base.
Yeah, I concur. I mean, I also have to look at the difference in the game. I mean, the game that back then and the Pete Rose is there in '80 when the Phillies won then was a contact game or whatever, where it's a home run strikeout game. It's all or nothing in 2008 and now especially nowadays or whatever. But so that's why I just think the leadership of Pete Rose and the fact that that's what it took him to get them over the top or whatever, that to me is a huge factor. Not that Ryan Howard wasn't a leader at all. He's a very quiet guy and everything. But just the impact on the ball club, I think, just gives me Rose the edge. Right,
but it's interesting, though, because you mentioned the changes in the game, which, the long ball plays a way bigger part in today's game. And in 2008, which is now quite a few years ago, played a much bigger part. But all right, second base, Matt. What do you got for second base?
Okay, well, from what I remember, Manny Trio was the second baseman for the 1980 Phillies.
Yes.
And Chase Utley, of course, was the second baseman for the 08 Phillies. Trio, solid player. I didn't look up what his average was or anything. If I remember correctly, he was didn't hit for great average or.
He was 292 that season.
Okay, so that's
his average was quite good that season.
So that's good numbers, especially that season. Utley, just guts, glue. I think they're probably about equal as far as fielding, maybe. But again, from a example standpoint, I think Utley's a leader in that regard. Maybe not verbally or whatever, but just setting the tone for the team. Him and Rollins, but we'll get to that. But Utley just set the tone as far as I know. What did you guys think as far as? I mean, I just said Utley, but that was just me.
Well, yeah, I was going to say for me, right? I thought it was close, and you're a little older than us, so I had to go look up Trio's some stuff, at least for that year. And yeah, he had a really very good year and good thing. But the big thing with Utley, I thought also, is he had some great important hits, and he also had the impressive play on defense when he faked it and then went home. So those kind of things, as well. But yeah, I mean, Manny Trio is one of those just overall really good players. But yeah, I gave my edge to Utley too.
Yeah, I think you got to give the edge to Utley. I mean, and I think their average, from what I wrote down, was identical, 292, identical average for the season for both guys.
Wow.
Utley had 33 home runs that year, a lot more home runs than Trio, and I don't know what he exactly had. I don't have it here in front of me, but much more. But again, the game was different in 1980. But when I think of just a quintessential baseball player, Chase Utley is that. Right. He's that guy who stood in there. He got hit with the ball, and he just ran to the base. Quiet guy. To me, I think he has a shot at the Hall of Fame. Chase Utley, I think.
Quiet guy, except the parade.
Yeah, except the parade. So definitely at second base, I think you got to give the edge to Chase Utley.
One other thing I was going to mention is that based on their batting order, Utley was 3-hole, and Trio was in the 8th spot. So that's the other part.
And some of that plays into what the manager plays into the philosophy, plays into who the other guys were that were hitting.
Sure.
Although, it's interesting, some of these other guys on the 1980 team. So that brings us to our shortstop. So on the 2018, of course, Jimmy Rollins is the shortstop. And on the 1980 team, let me make sure I got is Larry Boa. So, two great shortstops, and two homegrown kind of guys. Larry Boa came up, I mentioned this on a previous podcast. I read Larry Boa's book. He's a guy that made himself into a switch hitter in the minor leagues to make himself more marketable. Tough as nails kind of player, tough as nails, manager. Again, a guy that's not going to hit the long ball, which Jimmy hit more of, but not really what you're looking for out of your shortstop either. And leadership qualities, they're right kind of there. But I guess when I look at that 2008 team, I look at Rollins, Utley, and Howard as a core group. That's like, they're just Philadelphia Phillies for life. And not that Larry Boa isn't, because he is. But I would probably give the edge here to Jimmy Rollins. I think his skill set, a little bit more naturally gifted, a little bit more power in his hitting than a Larry Boa.
Well, I was just going to say, I gave my edge to Jimmy Rollins as well. I think what put him over was his just offensive abilities. He set the tone. He was a leader and leadoff hitter. They both had great gloves, defensively. So I think that's pretty much even. But I think Jimmy put him over the top. Plus, he also had that swagger. Especially when you think of I remember 2007, the year before. We're gonna overtake the Mets and whatever. But
and I think if I remember correctly, often it would be said how Jimmy goes, the team goes in that year. And I don't think they'd say the same thing about Larry Boa, because that probably be another guy on the team that we're probably going to talk about.
Right. But with Rollins, I think they did say that, and I think that actually proved to be. We could look up the streaks or the records during the season or whatever, and how Jimmy was playing at the time. But it stands out to me and Jimmy in 2008 was, I think it might have been, I don't know what game it was, maybe towards the end of the season or whatever, where they needed the game or whatever, and he stole second and then stole third or whatever. Just that kind of of swagger, and we're gonna take it to you and everything, and important plays, home runs in the championship series or whatever. And Boa to me is just like you said, tough as nails. He's not going to stand out as far as anything, but a glue guy, sort of like Utley at second for the 08 team or whatever. I just see Boa as that. And again, we talked about differences in eras. You didn't expect your shortstop was a lightweight hitter almost every team, especially in the NL. So
yes, very much.
So where are we at?
We're at third base. That's a quick conversation, but go ahead.
Wait a second. How do you get to start with first base with Rose, and now you get someone at third base?
Well, obviously, you can't not have Mike Schmidt, obviously. But I just look at, you look at overall the whole thing with the 08 team, like you probably forgot almost who the third baseman was. And it was Pedro Feliz. For those of you who don't remember, it was Pedro Feliz. Pedro Feliz did what you asked, because he wasn't asked to do all the other things. He did what he was supposed to, which was play great defense. And again, he was down. I even wrote the order. So like he was the 7-hole hitter right before. So again, he wasn't counted on offensively, but he just was a solid defender. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
No, good.
well, yeah, Phillies was just that's what his game was. He was a solid defender. He was 249 hitter, so he wasn't hitting too much, but he came through at a number of spots in the series when they needed him to. But there might be no better Philadelphia Philly ever than Mike Schmidt, maybe. So Mike Schmidt, obviously, he's on the Mount Rushmore of Philadelphia Phillies and far better third baseman than any other Philly ever.
Gold Glover and just he was. I don't know so much he was a leader on the 80 team like Rose verbally was or whatever, but Schmidt just needed him. He came through.
Yeah,
whatever. I mean, not that he didn't have strikeouts and everything, but he was clutch. So.
Yep, very much so.
All right, so where are we off to? Off to left field,
left
right
field?
field, left field?
Well, I was just going to catcher, but that's fine.
Catcher, okay.
Since we're
Catcher's
staying
fine.
infield yet.
Okay, we'll stick with
It's
catcher.
up to
That's
you.
Matt, catcher.
All right, so catcher on the 80 team, of course, is Bob Boone, with the
Boone.
exception of when Steve Carlton was pitching over Tim McCarver, but Bob Boone, basically.
Yes.
And on the 08 team was Carlos Ruiz. This was, I thought, a really tough one, for me at least. I liked Bob Boone. Like, again, I'm older than you guys, so I probably was a little bit older when the 80 team won the series. Boone, to me, was just, like, solid. I mean, you always could count on him and everything. And if I remember correctly, I don't remember the series or anything, but I remember, like, just a good hitter. I don't remember.
Right.
Does anybody, you guys have his average?
I don't
at
have his
all?
average.
Boone, let's see. I do have it down here. Let's see. He was a 229 average.
Okay.
And Chooch is a 219 average.
Yeah, so
they're right.
But both of them, their main goal or skill or role on the team, I should say, was defense, was to be in the behind the plate captain or whatever. Chooch, I think, had some big hits during the playoffs or whatever, if I recall correctly or whatever. So, I don't know. To me, that was like almost a toss-up.
Points.
Yeah, I mean,
Like if you had to choose one.
if I had to choose one, I would probably choose Boone just because that's my back in the day type thing or whatever. I don't know. I mean, literally, it would be like 51-49 or
Right.
something like
I was
that.
going to say, I
almost
just
next to impossible.
Yeah, I
for me.
edged with Boone as well, just
Yeah.
because just I thought he was, when you think of just overall, I think he was overall better hitter. Maybe not that in that season or not that season, but just in general, probably a little bit better hitter. But
I guess, because growing up, Bob Boone was one of those guys that I did like as a kid. So it's hard for me not to go with Bob Boone. But I'm going to go with Chooch. And I'm going to go with Chooch for this reason it kind of goes beyond that season he caught some major no-hitters and all those kinds of things. And, people don't give the catcher enough credit, I don't think. Because every pitcher that's successful has a successful catcher who's calling the game for him, and people don't take enough stock in that. I was just saying that to someone the other day. Like you take the catcher for granted, unless they're out there, hitting big home runs. You don't think about them, but they don't need to do that. They need to be a defensive catcher. They need to, stop the ball when there's a wild pitch, and they need to call a good game.
that's what they always said about Chooch, is that he called a great game.
And so I'll give Chooch the edge by 50.1 maybe, just for that reason alone in the catcher position. But Bob Boone is certainly a great Philadelphia Philly. So that brings us to the outfield. So I think I'm going to start in right field.
Okay.
And this is actually a tricky one for me, I'll be honest with you, because you got the 2008 team is Jason Worth, who's in right field. Who, if you guys remember that season, he actually started platooning the beginning of the season. He wasn't the Jason Worth that people knew after that. This season made him the Jason Worth that he then became and got paid a lot of money at Washington. Probably not play as well, to be honest with you, as he did when he was on the Philadelphia Phillies. But then you have Shake and Bake McBride. So what's important to remember, Bake McBride, is he was not a big home run hitter like Jason Worth. But his average that season was 309.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hard to go against, the 309 for the average for the season, because Jason Worth was 273, which is still very respectable, a lot more home runs. But I'm going to give McBride the edge for that reason, the consistency, not just because you love the name Shake and Bake McBride either, but I'll give him a little bit of the edge there. But that was a tough one, too. Go ahead.
Well, and the hair coming out.
Yeah,
You gotta love that with the old style helmet with the hair coming out or whatever. I was surprised when I looked up, because this is one that it wasn't like, I know that right away. So I looked up like the average, but I was surprised he had 87 RBIs for the season too. which that I didn't think he was a big RBI guy. And I don't even know where did he hit. You have any order?
Yeah, who? Which one?
McBride.
He was number 2. He's two-hole hitter, which I actually looked at. I looked at when who started, the World Series lineup. So they both batted number 2, which was, so they both, yeah. And then the other thing I was going to write, one thing I looked up, because again, I was, young enough that I wouldn't know stats for sure with the 80 team, is that apparently McBride's, he had better clutch. He was more clutch in the playoffs during that year in 80.
Well, I think we talked about that a little in another podcast, and he was better in the playoffs than he was the regular season and stuff.
So I gave the edge to McBride as well, just because when I started looking up, so. All right, so
center field?
I'll do center. Okay. Center field or 08 is Shane Victorino, the Flying Hawaiian, and 80 was Gary Maddox. Again, I think this was very, very tough as well. You look them up; they were both Gold Glove winners that year. Yeah. And then what I wrote for me is, that Victorino, supposedly, when I looked at Victorino, was a little bit better in the playoffs than Maddox was, and so I said I wrote down my heart went with Maddox, but I had to give the edge to Victorino. Is how I wrote it for this because same thing. Victorino, he batted. Where he was like a 6-hole hitter, but still, like he was.
Where did Maddox?
Maddox was the 3-hole hitter.
Really?
Yeah. So.
Well, Maddox was. I'll let you go then, Matt. But he was more known for his defense than his offense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Flying Hawaiian stealing bases. I think of that. But both of them running down, fly balls in the gap or whatever, that type of thing. But this was another to me. It was like, what do I do here? And again, because I'm a little older. I went with Maddox just because it's ingrained in my head his wide batting stance, his loping style, whatever. I mean, I love Shane Victorino. Don't get me wrong, whatever. But again, it's 51 to 49 type thing. There's a lot of these.
Right.
Well, because baseball has different skill sets to different things, offense and defense, and all those kinds of pieces. So this was a tough one for me too because Victorino 293 average that year. Maddox was only 259. They're close, but not the same there. And I would probably say that Maddox's defense was better than Victorino's, but I felt like Victorino, and part of this is because of watching more of the games there, came through in the clutch with some bigger hits. So if we're just going strictly on the World Series, I'm going to give the edge to Victorino. If we're going on full body of work, I might go with Maddox. But since we're looking at just that, I'm going to go with Victorino.
Well, plus when you think about both, like Worth, I mean, Worth wasn't really much of a player when we got him. And Victorino,
he was a rule whatever.
Right. Well,
Victorino was a Rule 5 guy.
I'm going
Worth may have been, but I know Victorino.
But Victorino was definitely a Rule 5 guy. So when I think about the 08 team, those two guys, in the beginning of the year, I don't think they were expecting, oh my God, we're going to have great players there. So.
All right, so that leads us to left field, which in the 1980 team was the Bull, Greg Lazinski. He's up here on the wall for those of you that are watching. And for the 2008 team was Pat the Bat. So we got good nicknames on both sides, pretty good. Although I go with the Bull for the nickname. So this was interesting because overall, again, kind of body of work, I think that the Bull was a far better hitter than Pat Burrell. But Pat Burrell had some good numbers. He had a lot of home runs. Lazinski didn't have as many that year. I don't know where I have that down.
19 is what I had.
It was real. Burrell had a lot more home runs, so I was really surprised that season too at how few Lazinski had. Lazinski's definitely not known for his defense, but then again, neither is Pat Burrell.
No.
I was going to say I wrote the same thing. Both questionable D for both guys. Both had power hitters. They were both the 5-hole hitter. So
if I'm picking for just this season, because my heart would go with the Bull because when I was a kid and everything, and I think his body of work is far better. But just this season, you got to go with Pat Burrell in my opinion because he had a better season. He had better, and Lazinski was there to hit home runs. That's why he was there. He was a power hitter. He wasn't there for his defense or anything else, and he didn't come through as much. He came through enough because they won the World Series. But
I was going to say, both were homegrown. Through the Phillies organization. Same thing. because again, too young to, so I had to look up the stats. And yeah, Burrow had better stats. Again, just going by World Series, I gave the edge to Burrow too. But
I gave the edge to Burrow too. I wanted whatever. I was surprised that the Bull only had 56 RBIs that season. Burrow had 86. Again, difference in the game maybe as well. I just was when I went to look up the stats on this, my immediate thought was, this is going to be the Bull.
Yeah.
And I started looking up stats, and I was like, oh wow. And if I recall correctly, and I don't know for certain, but I think I remember in the postseason at some point that Lonnie Smith and the Bull platooned a little bit.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
no,
Right. And that to me, that also said to myself about this comparison. Like, well, if you're going to platoon someone, it probably shouldn't be the guy that you're picking for that position. That's just me. So, where do we go next, guys?
Pitchers. I don't know if you want to use
I lump them into starting pitchers and kind of look a little bit, at who the starters were on each.
Am I up or are you
Yeah,
up?
go ahead.
Okay. All right. So starting pitchers. Now I wrote down for 08, we had Hamels, we had Moyer, no relation. Myers, Kendrick, and then I didn't remember. Easton started early. Eaton, and then they got Blanton later in the trade in August. So that most people remember the 08 Phillies, they would remember Blanton, not Eaton.
You remember a big hit by
Blanton,
right?
And then in 80, I was just going to get to that, but in 80, obviously we had Carlton, we had Dick Ruthven, I always remember to say his name wrong. Lurch, Christensen, Walk. Yes. So for me, one of the things I've started again, looking up the different things that the 08 pitching staff was supposedly more stable staff than the 80. The 80s staff, there was a lot more when you looked up who actually started games throughout the season of 80. There was way more pitchers that actually started the season, and then so you start looking around, and yes, I wrote Blanton having that big home run in the World Series, and then you look at Cole Hamels, both NLCS and World Series MVP. So I think I gave the edge to 08 starting pitchers. Is how I did it.
It was close for me. I looked at stats as well and everything. For me, and this goes back to old hat or whatever, but for me, the fact that when Carlton went out there, it was almost like just chalk up the W. He had, let's see, the 80 Phillies team had, as a staff, including relievers, had 889 strikeouts. He had 286 of them. 286 strikeouts on the team. Now, I know nowadays the game's more whatever, and some of the guys, Verlander guys, are getting like 300 or whatever,
right.
But I was just surprised that he had that many strikeouts. But it just... I didn't think about the stability, which I think is important, which I didn't take into the equation or whatever. But just from, and Hamels being I think Hamels came on at the end in the playoffs there, which is obviously extremely important. But I didn't view Hamels that season, I guess maybe till the playoffs, as an ace. I don't think
it was his coming out party.
Right, yeah, this is coming out party.
Right,
yeah.
I don't think of that staff as having an ace. He was the number one, but Carlton was an ace. So I gave the slight edge to the 80 Phillies starting pitchers, but again, I don't think it's 51-49, but it's pretty close to that.
Yeah, I had to go with the 80 Phillies also for the edge a little bit. I look at this, look at that list of starters: Cole Hamels, Brett Myers, Jamie Moyle, Kyle Kendrick, Joe Blanton. No one there is standing out to me except for Cole Hamels. Right. When I think about that team, I often think they just got lucky in the playoffs, or hot in the playoffs. I shouldn't say lucky. Hot, those pitchers did, because those are not great starting pitchers, except for Cole Hamels. The rest of those guys are journeymen. I love Jamie Moyer, not just because he's a Moyer, but because he was an old guy and he could paint the corners and he had some beautiful games. But you look at Carlton and Dick. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Dick Ruthven.
Those Carlton had 24 wins. Dick had 17, and Bob Walk. Yeah, Bob Walk had 11 wins, so the double-digit wins for those guys. So, and I guess I always think of Steve Carlton just on a real, maybe Cole Hamels will get there by the end of his career, and we'll think of him that way. But it's hard to think of him as a Philadelphia Philly.
Yeah, you need to bring him back.
Yeah. But when I look at the body of the whole starters, and I give the edge to the 1980 team because those starters, for the most part, were the starters for the 2008 team, and that's not a group that I'm saying let's bring all those dudes back and have them pitch. That's the team that's going to take us to the promised land every year.
Well, you have to go say that team definitely was their offense.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
definitely one with offense. Yeah, I mean.
Well, let's look at the bullpen a little bit then.
So Matt,
All
you
right.
want to start?
So yeah, I mean, I don't have like all the entire
I-
bullpen for each, and maybe you can help.
I
out
have
with
some.
that.
Yeah, go ahead.
But what I have down for the 80 Phillies, I have down. Obviously, Tug was the closer, or whatever. But I had Ron Reed was a very important like setup type guy, although they really didn't call it setup at that point,
Yeah.
or whatever. Dickie Knowles, Warren Brewster, there's a couple others or whatever. But then on the '08 side, obviously you had Brad Lidge as a closer. You had Ryan Madsen in what at that time is a setup
Right.
role, and then you had like sort of J.C. Romero, Durbin.
Right.
I
You got 'em.
forgot,
You wrote
so-
all the ones I wrote.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so I had all those done. I mean, to me, this was I mean, I think part of it is again the game in '08, the bullpen was way more of an important factor. In other words, I recall end of the season playoffs. It was almost like it was Romero 7th,
Uh-huh.
Madsen
Durbin,
8th,
yeah, right.
or Durbin,
Right,
whatever.
right, seven, right.
Durbin or
Right,
Romero
lefty,
7th.
right.
Madsen 8th, Lidge 9th, and it was like they just had to get to the 7th, and then it was slam the
Boom,
door
boom, boom.
almost all the time. So to me, that for that reason, I gave the edge to the '08 Phillies as far as the bullpen as a total
Yeah.
package.
Yeah, I think I agree. As a total, I think I would say the same thing. They were reliable.
Right.
It was lightning in a bottle because,
Yeah.
perfect season for Brad Lidge was saved.
Right.
So you got to highlight that. That, if anything, you think, okay, the bullpen. Madsen was the best that year they probably ever was.
Yeah.
J.C. Romero was that was the best year of his career. A year or two later, he was
man,
playing
nobody's
independent
guy.
league ball.
Yeah.
So, that's a guy. I saw him play independent league ball, in Lancaster against the Barnstormers. I forget what team he was playing for, and I was like, what happened? Like,
Right.
so, and you look at the 80 team, and those guys are good. Tug McGraw's the standout there,
Right.
and he had, I think, 20 saves that season. You're right, the bullpen didn't play as big a role, and there's a lot of other guys who, like you said, Jeff, that were in that
Right.
rotation of pitchers that were a guy that was here and there. It just wasn't a reliable, standard like the 2008.
Well, I was just gonna say. I mean, I highlighted. Lidge was 41 for 41, and yeah, you got to the 7th. If you got 7, 8, 9, you had, and that's what I mean. You think about like a Madsen, how important he was, because he would just bring it right in. So, I put '08 as well as mine.
So what else we got? I think the other thing I would
Bench.
Bench.
All right. I wasn't gonna go ahead.
You have bench. I was gonna say I got bench. So I wrote down some of the guys from '08. You had I only wrote last names. So we have Dobbs. You had Bruntlett, who had that triple play
In a meaningless game at the
yes,
end of the
yes,
season.
yeah.
You had Jenkins, and then you had your backup Chris Coast, who was the 33-year-old rookie
Oh, that's right. I
that
forgot
year.
about Chris
And then the big
Yeah.
bench guy who didn't get there until August, which became huge, was Matt Stairs. So you had that. But then, I mean, a lot of your 80 guys, I remember all these 80 guys. You had Gross, Lonnie Smith, who ends up being rookie, year candidate, Del Unser. I didn't remember there was two Vukovic's.
Yeah.
There were two Vukovic's, and then Moreland was their backup. So when you look at stats for backups, I actually did.
I
I
forgot
saw,
McCarver.
well, yes. But when you look at the actual stats, it was like a no comparison stat, almost, was for '08 to be better. Overall, they had '08 had. This is again during it said playoffs, so playoff run. The '08 bench had 29 home runs. I guess it must have been home.
That could have been best.
No, but I mean, the '80 only had nine home runs.
the whole season.
Yes,
Must
and then
have been
20.
last season.
Yeah, so it must have been 29. And then same thing. They had more RBIs, more runs, and they said the only thing that really the '80 team had was Lonnie Smith as far as that bench guy that was impressive. But so
Yeah, just at name value, all those guys from the 80 team tug at my heartstrings as being guys that were,
Yes.
because some of those guys were quintessential to the team moving forward and so on. But just looking strictly at the season, and not, I didn't do a lot of homework on the bench. It's interesting to mention Jeff Jenkins because that was the platoon guy with Worth, and then I think after Worth got the starting job, you didn't see Jeff Jenkins very much at all after that. But anyway, so I'll lean into the 2008 team on that because of the numbers.
Yeah, it's just impact. I think of impact.
Right.
I mean, no one who likes the Phillies is ever going to forget Stairs' home.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
literally excluding your brain. So I went with the '08 bunch
right,
as well.
okay.
I think the other piece I brought up in my mind was a manager, You know, you got to look at the manager. So, the manager for, and there's still a couple other things I wanted to talk about, but the manager for 1980 was Dallas Green. The manager for 2008 was Charlie Manuel. So, I didn't go dig into their records too much or anything, but I'm gonna personally give the edge to Dallas Green. As much as I love Charlie, there's nothing about Charlie that sets the world on fire. He was what this team needed at the time after the other coaches, and it worked for that team. But he's not a guy I think that you could plug out and put in other teams and he's going to be that as successful. Maybe not. I think, offensive-minded, hitting, and a good affable kind of guy. But
Players coach.
That's what
but Dallas Green, I think, I don't want to say Charlie's not a baseball guy because he definitely is. But Dallas Green was a guy who was in the organization beyond just coaching for many, many years. So I gave it maybe just because of the history.
Yeah. I didn't really, I have them written down, but I didn't really give a check mark for an edge for either of these. I mean, my biggest thing with Charlie is I think about baseball being a 162-game season, and, like as Larry Bowen learned as a manager, you can't be on the guys constantly in baseball, and I think Charlie understood that, especially with a team like this, and just his help with hitting. I mean, I'm sure he had a hitting coach. I don't know. Greg Gross maybe was a hitting coach?
No, Greg was...
I think it was.
It was the year before Greg Gross was the hitting coach. It was another former Philly whose name is now escaping.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, Charlie's, can actually the manager can work with the guys in the cage or whatever, or talk with them about hitting or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I like that. I love Dallas Green too, of course, just because who he was and his role, continued role in the organization as well. So
yeah, I couldn't pick either.
Yeah.
So, all right.
What else did you have?
Well, I mean, I just look at overall. So overall. I'll give my overall. We're wrapping things up here. We're getting toward the end. So my overall, I looked at all those comparisons and looking at the overall team. And as much as I want to pick the 1980 team because that was when I was a kid and that's like I said, quintessential Phillies, I'm going to give the edge to the 2008 team as an overall better team. And some of the reasons why they had more wins than the 1980 team. They had less losses in the playoffs. Than the 1980 team. I think they just had better, some better hitting, more home runs. Now I get it, but chicks dig the long ball.
Yeah.
So so I gave the edge to the 2008 team over the 1980 team as just an overall little bit better team.
You can go ahead.
So I came to the same conclusion. 3 losses in the playoffs, 1 in each round. Of course, there's an extra round in there or whatever, but still, the way I wrote down was. I think of the 08 team as a better complete team. I think of the 80 team as better stars. I mean, Rose, Schmidt, Carlton. If you look at like Phillies all time, even though Rose isn't thought of as a complete only Philly. I mean, you really have 3 of the best players ever to play the game on that one team. So I think of that as like better stars or whatever. And I think that they, the 80 team with Rose coming on board. I mean, the Phillies I wrote down that. They had sort of paid their dues, like 77, 78. I don't know. I know the Pirates won the division. Again, there was only 2 divisions, so Phillies didn't even make the playoffs that year and might have been only a game or 2 out of, first place in the East that year. So, but I look at them as they paid their dues, whereas the 08 team caught lightning in a bottle, got hot and whatever, and took off and run it. And you'd think they would have cashed that into something else as it went later, but, thank God they won in 08. So, so I gave the slight edge to the 08 team.
I'll finish up. I gave the 08 as well because I did it as in all the first base, second base, third base, all the way through. 80 team had 4 first place votes. All the others had more. So,
all right. Well, there you go. There you have it, everybody. That's our comparison of the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies team to 2008. You've been listening to and watching the Two Mats and a Jeff podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And listen to us on Spotify, Anchor, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.